Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We know this is the 5th day of the festival and towards the end of the day, so we're glad to see you're all here. I wanted to just say that I'm no longer a young South Asian, as you can see. This was back in the day when they made a list which included people like M. Night Shyamalan, Nora Jones, and a young Kamala Harris. And this was long, long time ago, as you can imagine. And he also mentioned an organization called SAJA, which some people pronounce as Saza, which means punishment. But SAJA is the South Asian Journalists Association. And at SAJA, we do a lot of collaborations with the National Association of Black Journalists. I come to this with my collaboration with organizations like that. Also, we work with multiple civil rights organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're the group that brings down those hateful statues and help kill the Ku Klux Klan, as well as the John and Lillian Miles Lewis Foundation. And John Lewis, I hope some of our Indian friends know through his work in Congress, but also his urging Americans to create good trouble. And it would have been his 85th birthday later this year, and it's the start of Black History Month in the United States. And one of the things that he said has resonated with me in our lives as we think about what's happening in the United States right now to black, brown, and everybody else. He said that we all came on different ships to America, but we're all in the same boat now. And that, I think, applies to the entire planet, that we all had our own journeys, but we're all on the same boat now. And we're going to use the next 45 minutes or so to learn about the work of these incredible writers and to have them share some of their thoughts on what's happening in Black communities, Black and brown communities around the world. So let's get started. And Irenosen, we'll start with you. Tell us about your latest book and what you've been working on.
So I guess I would describe my work broadly as speculative fiction. I write really wild, subversive short stories and experimental novels. My latest book is Curandera, which translates to shaman. It's a novel about shamanism, female desire, and mythic revenge across different dimensions. So historical and modern. One timeline set in 17th century Cape Verde in Africa, and the other in the present day. So it follows a group of shamans, really, on this kind of secret task to create a new utopia and the perils that come with that. And then in the 17th century timeline, we follow the story of Zulmira, who arrives in Gethsemane, a small town, infiltrates the life of a fisherman, and things slowly begin to go wrong in the town. Is it or is it not connected to her? And is she a force for good or not? All these kind of subtleties are at play. But yeah, for me, it was really fun and exciting because I'm very much interested in African history. My first novel, Butterfly Fish, I reimagined the Benin Kingdom, which is where my family are from. So similarly, I'm kind of reimagining 17th century Cape Verde and the lives of these characters, as well as the lives of the modern day Black characters. But really, I would say it's a spiritual novel, but it's also quite dark, and it also deals a lot with female anger. So I think it's a feminist novel in some ways. And yeah, things like centering Black female desire, which we still don't see happen enough, the complexities around that identity, and what it means to sort of navigate the world in this body, all themes that I explore in the novel.
I know you're not fond of a particular way in which journalists especially characterize your work as the use of the word magic realism. So talk a little bit about that. In India, we love using that term because of the history of folks who have done a lot with that.
Yeah, no, and I don't have anything against the term. My thing is let's continue to create terms. Mm-hmm. Let's continue to kind of expand the umbrella and how we define what is a sort of playfulness with language. because there are nuances. You know, I remember someone saying, "Oh, you must have been inspired by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you know, who is the dawn of magic realism." And I often say, well, I spent my formative years in Nigeria, in Africa, listening to griot-style tales, you know, folk tales, fables, where there was always a lesson, but the beginning or the middle or the end might change depending on who was telling the story. But they were often fantastical tales, you know, brilliant. So that kind of sat in my bones, in the very matter of me. So that's where I get, you know, my influence in terms of the magical, you know, looking at the everyday through a slightly different lens. And I guess presenting people with worlds that feel familiar but also strange and new. So I would credit, you know, that African influence as shaping that. But I was so well read as a youngster. I mean, I absorbed everything from Marquez to Toni Morrison, you know, to Margaret Atwood. I love those kind of daring, bold voices. And what I wanted to do was create a lane for myself whilst also maybe having a nod, you know, to those references. And of course, I can't forget the phenomenal Octavia Butler and the influence of her writing on me. I remember picking up Wild Seed, and that blew my mind. That she
predicted a lot of things that are
She
happening
predicted
now,
the Trumpian president,
yes, exactly.
climate change, all the craziness that we see happening. You know, she
even fires in
foresaw
LA.
that.
Even fires in LA.
Yeah, you know, as she is the mother
Yes.
in that regard. So yeah, I think I've been very lucky in that sense.
Thank you. Ijeoma, tell us about some of your latest work.
So my third book came out a little over a year ago, titled Be a Revolution. My first book was So You Want to Talk About Race, which is in many ways like a primer. It discusses the issues around race and racism that people stumble over the most when trying to have conversations or trying to solve problems. It addresses questions that I often wish people would ask. And then Mediocre, full title, Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, because no one ever wants to say the full title. I think it makes them a little uncomfortable, is talking about how we have constructed ideas of power and success on this very toxic white patriarchy, and how it impacts everyone in the United States and other places as well, and how it has over the entire history of the country. And it's really a diagnostic pointing out these issues, and if we don't address fundamentally how we view power and how we view success, we won't be able to really tackle these larger societal issues. And then my third book is Be a Revolution, How Everyday People Are Fighting Oppression and Changing the World, and How You Can Too. I like a descriptive title, is really looking at, you know, when you do this sort of work, people come up to you all the time and say, well, what can I do? Or even worse, I wish there was something I can do. But it's so big, it's so hard. And for me, as a Black American, as a Nigerian American, every day I am aware of what people are doing because I exist because of it. And so for this book, what I wanted to do was answer the what can we do by showing what people have been doing. And so this book is profiles of, I think, 34 movement workers in various fields around the country working at the intersections of systemic racism, showing their path into their work, how they do their work, how they're serving community, and how you can support and join that work as well.
One of the things that we talked about, we had a panel about a new America, the new America, and one of the folks came up to me afterwards and said, you were also optimistic, or relatively optimistic, considering everything that's happening. And I think even since we were all on stage on Friday to today, terrible things have happened in the US. So how do you do your work and stay motivated as you write about some terrible things, systemic and otherwise, that are affecting people in the United States and worldwide?
I mean, I would say, first of all, I don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I'm still a Black woman in America. Mm-hmm. I started writing after Trayvon Martin was murdered. Mm-hmm. He was murdered walking down the street, buying candy. That reality still exists for me, for my children, for my entire community. That doesn't go away if I decide writing is too hard. I don't give that up for an easier life. At least I can say something. At least I can do something. So for me, I am motivated. At first I was really writing from a place of deep pain, and often that is a place I'm in. But I'm motivated every day by love of my community. And in a way, I feel like to be overly pessimistic is to dishonor the lineage I come from and the history that all Black people come from as some of the most harmed people in the history of the world over and over again. And yet here we are, still at the foundation of so much of what is beautiful in the world, still caring for each other, still building families, still finding out new ways to live, new ways to come together and care for each other. How can I be pessimistic in the face of that? How can I look at everything that we have survived? How can I be, the daughter of someone who survived a genocide and say, oh, Trump defeated me? Who is he in comparison to that? And so that makes it a lot easier to do that, to do the work that I do.
Would you like to respond to that? And then I have a question for you.
No, I think a lot of that really resonates, thinking about the joy, the love, the innovation, the power in Black communities, and how often being marginalized forces you, to have a certain superpower in a way, because people underestimate you so much and they never see you coming, so that allows you in a way to kind of galvanize and hone the power of your community and to use your voice, to shine a light on the lived experiences of those communities. And similarly for me, what I try to do with my work is show that innovation, is try to expand that as much as possible, because I'm really fascinated and galvanized by the Black alternative space. I mentioned Octavia Butler, but also people like Sun Ra, also people like Samuel R. Delaney, who have done tremendous work, to show the humanity of Blackness, but also to show the kind of rich, imaginative history that we have. It's not just pain, it's creativity, it's passion. So a lot of that speaks to me. And of course, we have also been at the forefront of trends and incredible things, music, art, architecture, all of that. That doesn't really get discussed enough, which is why I'm so passionate about centering African history in my novels and using that space in a way to be able to, expand that and those ideas. Yeah.
And certainly social media and TikTok, all the dances, all of that, which then are appropriated by others, is something that we have seen. The topic of our panel is The Future is Black. You run a festival called Black to the Future. So. Yeah. Tell me what your festival does, and then how do you reflect on both titles?
Yeah, so Black to the Clue is in the title. Black to the Future is looking at Black artistry through an Afrofuturist lens. But generally that tends to focus on technology, and science. But what I wanted to do was, how do I push the boundaries with that? How do I do that to include, the past, the present, and the future, but look at it across multiple disciplines? So it's not a literature festival singularly. We program across theatre, across film, across music, and it's a fledgling festival. It's only been, I think, a year, really, but I wanted to be really ambitious with it, and kind of celebrate these Black artists who perhaps people are not really aware of, artists who are doing incredible work and need more of an audience, need more of a platform. So the idea was, to initially do a kind of weekend takeover at this venue, which was pre-pandemic, but then I kept dreaming about it. And with my then producer, we kept having conversations and we kept being excited, and it kept growing and growing until it became the festival, and then we partnered with the Royal Society of Literature in the UK, partnered with the British Library, which is a huge institution, partnered with Christie's Auction House, the Women's Prize, Edinburgh International. So I've really been heartened by the response to it. I had people tell me behind the scenes, I'm not sure you should do a festival with that kind of framing, that people may not want to support it or you may not get money behind it. And I'm really glad I didn't listen. I'm really thrilled I didn't listen because it's been amazing to see the response to it in the UK. And what I want to continue to do is just build on that. We've had some great names involved. We had Adjoa Ando from Bridgerton headline for us.
Wow.
Worked with Terence Nance, who's a frequent collaborator of Andre 3000 and Solange. N.K. Jemisin, who's like the queen of science fiction, just incredible. And so we want to continue to, produce and curate diasporically, and really, celebrate Black narratives, kind of across the world. Yeah.
What's occurring to me, what I'm occurring to me here is that you're giving us a reading list, a viewing list, a listening list. I hope that someone can take notes and share them with everybody because I think that would be fantastic.
I'm generous like that.
That's the confidence that comes from knowing that you're doing such great work. I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment, so please think of questions. We'll get a microphone to you. I want to ask you about your, another term. So we say black to the future is black. We say black joy as a term that you also talked about. What does that mean, and how do you think of that in your work?
So I love Black Joy. Black Joy is a center to my work, but I'm actually going to shift a bit what I want to talk about because I actually want to follow up a little bit on what you were saying because it's so beautiful to me and it's something I've been really stuck on. White supremacy is a war on imagination, first and foremost, right? So it has to tell a story about people, the relative value, what they can do, what they can't do, right? And we see this in all racism, casteism, patriarchy. First and foremost, you have to say, this is who you are, this is who you will always be, this is who they are, this is who they will always be. And so the power of imagination and the power of imagining ourselves into a different future is crucial to revolutionary work, and it's crucial to our joy. It is crucial to us being able to build a world outside of these oppressive norms. And so I really do view, speculative fiction in our communities, Afrofuturism, as revolutionary work. Because we have to say, it's not just we're going to alter these things that were built to always exclude us, always harm us. We have to do world building like you do when you're writing speculative fiction. You have to say, is there oxygen in this new world that I'm building? Is there grass in this new world that I'm building? Is there a government at all? We have to be able to believe that we can build something different. And that means we also have to be informed about the real fact that we were something different, that we existed before whiteness, we existed before capitalism, we existed before straightness, we existed before all of these things, so that we know we have it within us to build something else. And so I really want to point out the power of radical imagination for our work. And so, yes, in Joy, part of that is, I think, I interviewed Richie Reseda, an activist in California, and he said, the more liberated I get, the more queer I get. And basically, the more closer I get to who I am as a person, the more he exists outside of the boundaries of white supremacist patriarchy and capitalism. And we have to encourage that, and that means we have to start imagining ourselves into a new future.
Thank you. Let's see, can we get a microphone out to the audience, please, while they're getting that together? Oh, here you come. Let's see. Oh, right here, right in the front. Yeah, thanks. And then next to that. Yeah, go next to him, yeah, please.
Hello. My question is for Ms. Okojie about your festival. What I want to say first is blackness is not one thing. It's really a multilateral experience lived all over the world. My experience is not the same as someone from America or someone from the Great Britain or someone that lives even in India. So I want to ask, in regards to music, do you try to bring up, or as much as you can, every type of black music you can find, or is it a specific type that you bring forth in your festival. Because what we have seen is that when something comes from Africa, sometimes it's like, okay, that's a village music. I'll take the example of the group that originally sang Mobubwe. They all died in utter poverty when their song was stolen by Disney. And it's now a big song. For those who don't know, it's the Awim Mawe, Awim Mawe. They all died in utter poverty. I'll talk about Manuji Bango, whose song was stolen twice. First time by Michael Jackson, second time by Rihanna. So I feel like the West, in the West, we take what Africa has to offer and popularize it without trying to mention where it was coming from originally.
Yeah,
Thank you. Good question.
Thank you. That's such a great question. Well, it's a fledgling festival, like I said, and we've only had so far one chance to do a bit of a music program, and our curator for that is Elliot Jack, who's fantastic in the UK, really knows his music. And has a great ear. And what he did was curate the music program for the British Library, which was sort of black techno, because a lot of people don't know that black people were founders of that. Originally, people are not aware of that. Sort of dance music comes from black culture. So he curated that, and that was a very specific choice because it spoke to a lot of the futuristic elements in the program. But what we want to do is continue to incorporate different types of black music in our program going forward. At the moment, we know that stuff like Afro beats is huge and has exploded. But there are original music that come from Africa. For example, from Nigeria, where I'm from, we have high life music and things like that. So what I want to do at some point is curate a night around that coming up so that people can, understand those references and be able to sort of celebrate it. So I think the festival is biannual. It's every 2 years. And we really want to work towards having an eclectic mix in the music program. So that's something that we're going to work towards. But very, very aware of your point and very aware of the fact that people appropriate what we do. It gets sort of watered down and then not recognized in the same way, or we're not given credit for creating these incredible things. So it's something that I'm really conscious of, and I want to ensure going forward that we're able to celebrate that in the right way. So thank you so much. It's such a pertinent question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ranjini. Thank you. It's been really inspiring listening to the both of you. And my questions to both the ladies. As women, and particularly as brown and black women, I feel like we've always been caught between somebody's fear and fetish, right? So when we tell stories, how much of those stories are an exploration of our own inner world, and how much of that is actually an experience that we're putting up so that we may be better understood by the outside world, right? So how much of that is an authentic self that we're putting out, and how much of it is an effort to make the community and where we come from understood? And in doing the latter, do we sometimes lose the authenticity of those stories?
Question about fear and fetish and where the characters and subject matter comes in. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me is that's kind of out of my control. Mm-hmm. So I ignore that when I'm writing. What I want to do is write authentic characters that speak to my lived experience. So when I was writing in my 20s, I produced a collection called Speak Gigantular, which explored what it meant to be a young black woman, moving through the world in this body and encountering all kinds of experiences. And it was funny, it was dark, it was raw, it was sexual. And for me, it was about also exploring the corners of those experiences, the edges that people don't talk about. And I can only reflect the complexities of my experiences and the young black women and women of color that, I knew growing up. So for me, there's so much richness there. And you can also speak to those fetishes. You can rebel against it and tell stories and narratives that push back, which I also did. And it's fun. For me, it's fun. It's a kind of power, I think, to have the agency and interrogate those themes. Like I said, it's sort of out of your control in a way, the fetishization of black women. And we know that there's been a history of that with black and brown women. But I know that there is so much richness and color and vibrancy and humanity, it's telling it through a compassionate lens. For me, I'm always coming at stories from the angle of care and love and compassion in regards to writing characters, especially black women, because so much of the world doesn't want to give us that. So, I feel a sense of responsibility, but it's also a joy for me to be able to do that.
Thank you. Ijeoma.
I find that it's quite complicated for me in writing nonfiction because I'm writing about social issues and I know who I always say when I'm teaching, know who you're writing to, know who you're writing for, know who you're responsible to. And so because I am writing about these complex social issues, I know that who I'm writing to may be different who I'm writing for and may be different than who I'm responsible to. And that means recognizing my privilege as I'm writing and my privilege of platform. So when I'm writing as a black woman, about complex social issues around race and gender, I have to be very aware of my audience. And I wish I had the freedom that like Toni Morrison insisted upon, right? But I have seen clearly how easily work can be manipulated because black women are expected to carry this burden. But then if we talk authentically about our experiences, especially around patriarchy in our own communities, that is used against our families. It is used against the men in our communities and is used against us. And yet, we deserve to live. We deserve to be able to, I deserve to be able to have conversation and say, this is what I face as a black woman. And so part of that I do know is out of my control. Right? I know I can be as clear as possible and put as many disclaimers as possible into my work, and someone will twist it in a way that will harm my community. But I also know then that I have to be very clear that just knowing my experience isn't enough. It is inherently political to tell your truth, but your truth isn't the truth. And a lot of times people get put on pedestals, especially where we are tokenized, as the voices. Like there are so many people thought of as feminist writers, who I will say are not feminist in their theory. They're feminist writers because they spoke openly about being a woman, and it resonated, but their theory and their understanding of how their work impacts people, or their understanding of why their experience is what it is limited. And so as someone who tries to write as an authority on this, it means it is not just enough that I insist on being believed in what I experience, which I do insist. I have to understand why, clearly, so that when I am writing, I am not creating harm due to my lack of nuance, my lack of depth, and my lack of understanding. And that is as far as my responsibility can go. I can talk about the misogyny I face, but I better know why I'm facing it. And it doesn't mean that I think every black woman has to have that analysis. That's a burden that shouldn't be placed upon us. It means that I know the responsibility of my platform. And I know that I have family and community I'm responsible to. And I know that it actually makes me more free when I'm trying to address this, because I know who my anger should be towards, what my anger should be towards. I know what I need to be focusing on for change, but it is always complicated, and I do actually always feel that burden and feel like it will never be enough. To write honestly about race and gender as a black woman means that you have white women coming to you saying you're a woman first, and you'll have black men coming to you saying you hate black men. And you're fighting for every member of your community. And you're expected to fight for every member of your community. And so I know that that is something that I have to keep doing my work as authentically and with as much integrity as possible, and people will do with it what they will.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have a question. And then over there, please, in the corner. Yeah.
Hi, this is Sudasha. I do get this that we are talking about the racism and the generational problem in the society. But I just wanted to know about this thing. But I must appreciate you. It takes gut as a female to do something to change in the society. But I just wanted to know one thing. Would you like to share an example where you have seen that your work is actually impacting the society and it actually, changing? Something that is changing in the society.
Okay, so you wrote a whole book where you're giving a guidebook to folks to change society. So talk about that, and then we'll go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to understand that the reason why you can look around and say, oh, nothing's changing is by design. And it's not because nothing is changing. It's because the stories of what we do are erased. We survive every day. I see people coming together to help people, stop people from kicking them out of their homes, right? To find medical care, to find resources for people, to get justice for people who've been harmed. But even for me as a mother, I have 2 sons, a 23-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I watch them navigate the world. I watch them interrupt their friends and peers, right? Because of these discussions we're having, because of the work we're having, have them say, no, that's not okay, this is what we're doing. I see how empowered they are. But the truth is that every day in our communities, there are neighborhoods who have, figured out ways to keep each other safe without police. There are neighborhoods who have come and reclaimed property to ensure that Black and brown communities can't be kicked out of where they are, right? There are people who've reclaimed entire plots of land and that are now community centers. There are people who have actively worked to protect the environment for Black, brown, and indigenous communities. These things happen on a local level, and the truth is our communities wouldn't exist if it didn't happen. But we are told it doesn't matter, we're told it doesn't exist. And so part of what I try to do is document that, and it's something we all must do. We are our own historians. No one's gonna come from a big university and say, let me write your story down. And I know this because when I go to write and I'm researching, I can't find it. I have to go into communities and ask. And so part of the important work that we need to be doing is documenting for history and for future generations why we exist and how we have survived.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's about freedom around what stories can be told and who is given permission to tell those stories. I think in the publishing world, that's starting to open up, and hopefully I have contributed to that. I took the baton from Octavia Butler, who was writing sci-fi and expanding ideas around what Black people could write. And I feel that in the UK, there is a limitation in terms of what we are supposed to be writing. So people would publish stuff around, immigrant stories, etc., which is all very important. But that freedom of the imagination to be able to move between genres, to be able to write fantasy, sci-fi, experimental stuff, I've been really lucky in the sense that I was also influenced by people like Bernardine Evaristo and Leonie Ross. These are Black women writers who were pushing the boundaries of form and what's possible. And we were very much marginalized in the beginning. So for me to be able to do that, what I'm doing is writing for the young Irenosen who didn't see herself reflected, and young Black girls and girls of color who may think, oh, I can only write like this or tell particular narratives. They will pick up a book like Nudibranch, which is an absolutely wild collection of stories, and see what's possible. And that, for me, is incredibly exciting. Yes, it is political to move through the world in this body, but that's not the only thing. That's not the only aspect. We should be able to write all kinds of stories. We should be able to write about nature, about Mars, about space, about, all sorts. And very often we're not allowed to do that because the gatekeepers block it. But I think now there is a change happening, and I am absolutely thrilled about that because it's a sense of freedom and liberation. So for me, that there is such power in that.
Such an important point we make to journalists all the time. Don't interview Black people about so-called Black issues only. Yeah. Have them talk about other topics that you won't normally call them for.
Yeah, let us talk about craft and process. We rarely get asked about that. Exactly. So it's really important.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes left, so short questions, short answers, please. Go ahead.
Short question. My question is for those people who are fighting for freedom and dignity from colonial occupation, like the Tibetans and the Palestinians. What we can learn from the experience and the resilience of our Black brothers and sisters? Thank you.
Ijeoma, you want to start us?
I think that's a great question, and I actually think it's what we can all learn from each other. So, I think it is no stretch to say that Black Americans have defined a lot of what resistance against racialized oppression looks like around the world. We have done a lot of work in that, but Indigenous peoples have been fighting oppression and colonization for ages. Koreans actually are at the forefront of fighting digital oppression and surveillance right now. So I think a lot of this is about how we share information, but also see shared oppression. So like you bring up Palestine, right? It is so important for Black Americans to understand that right now what Israel is doing to Palestinians is also aiding in Black oppression, not only in legitimizing the oppression of people of color, but in the fact that police officers in the US are being trained by Israeli military on how to oppress us, and that they're sharing technology to use as violence against both of our communities. So in recognizing that, not only recognizing how connected our oppressors are, which we must, we can then recognize how connected our liberation is. And wherever one of us can be more free, then we all become more free. And so sharing resources, taking a lot of the theory and a lot of the work around abolitionism, which I think is like our lasting legacy, right, of what true liberation can mean, taking that and adding the techniques and all of these things, adding indigenous ideas around gender, around all of these other things that are used to oppress us and hem us in, and coming together and saying, take what works for you, right? And leave something that might work for us. I do think that communication and coordination is the future, and we know it's the future because oppressive systems have been fighting against it. They have been trying to make it illegal for us to be in solidarity with each other, for us to protest for and with each other. And if they're against it, we know we got to be for it, right? That is one of the clearest signals that we are on the right path. And so I love that you asked that question because that is the way forward.
Thank you. Let's, a question here, please. Go ahead.
My name is Safia, I'm Nigerian. I have a question for both of you, considering you both have Nigerian heritage. The theme of this session is The Future is Black, and your festival is Black to the Future. So we already know what these issues are, but there's an issue that I feel keeps reoccurring every time. We have people in the West who are Black, who feel they are different Black from people who are actually back home in Africa. So how do you feel there can be a collaboration where we can all be on the same page and realize that regardless of where we are, our problems are literally the same. We are both oppressed at home by the Black police who look like us. The people in the West are also oppressed, but we need to find a way beyond that, find out how to actually collaborate and move things forward. For example, you have a festival going on now in the UK, but back home in Nigeria, at least where I come from, almost every festival we have is centered around parties. Like we have the Dirty December, we have the Year of the Return in Ghana. How do you feel we can move these conversations forward and actually highlight these things you've mentioned, art, craft, space, and other beautiful things as well?
Thank you. Sounds like you need to have a chapter of your festival
afterwards as well.
Nigeria.
Well, I do know about Ake Festival, which is a big book and arts festival that I attended, I think maybe 10 years ago, that speaks to all those themes. And I remember attending and being blown away by the conversations because Ake kind of programmed diasporically. So not just emerging and established Nigerian voices, but Black voices from across the world. And I was very much struck by that. And I was struck by the conversations artists were having, at lunch, at dinner, at breakfast, speaking to all these themes of, how we can work together more, how we can create spaces more, how we can elevate each other more. What you're speaking of is the kind of divide and conquer issue, right? Which is really hard to get away from in the West. And like you said, I think it's important to acknowledge, firstly, that we've all gone through, systemic racism and prejudice and patriarchal systems that hold us back, and that we all want the same thing, right? We all want better visions and better versions of the now and the future. So I think it's to have conversations that speak to that, and within your communities, see what's possible, what can you do to take things to the next level in that regard? And how can you curate, organize, have events, have arts festivals, create spaces where you can make change? Because there are incredible change makers on the ground. If we look at the sort of galvanizing of Black voices that has occurred over the last 10 years or so, that started at a grassroots level and then kind of exploded internationally. So I think it's important to recognize we do have power, we do have agency, but it's about recognizing each other's histories. Obviously, Black Americans have a different history to Africans, and that's a very nuanced conversation. I'm sure you're fully aware of that. So it's about exploring and listening, and seeing what's possible. Obviously, you can't solve these problems and these issues, quickly or easily, but it's to kind of start and see what's possible.
Thank you. Let's get 2 quick questions, and then we'll have you respond to the questions together, and a final thought each. So go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I was really struck by your comment about your sons, and I was just curious to what degree you're observing sort of transformations or growth into, on a broader scale, of like anti-capitalist, anti-racist, and forms of masculinity that change, that are different than sort of the ones that were trained under these sort of contemporary patriarchal norms, these historical patriarchal norms.
Thank you. One more question. Whoever's closest to that mic, go ahead. Just whoever's nearby. Thank you.
Whenever we talk about Black people, this talk about aggression always follows, inevitably. But a few decades down the lane, what is it in the cultural and heritage aspect that you truly want your people to be remembered for?
Okay. Can you answer all of that, and a couple of final thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely see a change in generations. My son called me once, really upset in high school, really upset with a friend of his. And he was so angry this friend had really hurt him. And it was so interesting because I noticed that in the midst of conversation, he had changed pronouns. And because this person who had hurt him deeply had changed their pronouns since they had been friends. And so even as mad as he was, he kept correcting himself to make sure he used the proper pronouns because he wasn't going to disrespect that in the process. And I realized, like, generationally how different that is, the ease with which, I am so angry at you. I'm so mad at you, but I'm going to respect this part of you, right? And these are things that don't have to be discussed. So what I notice a lot with my kids, I start to lecture them, and they're like, I know, and they can frame it, right? They can say it, is a lot of the work that we've had to do to create language, to get people used to the language, to get them to stop fighting the language. The younger generation, they're like, no, we want to apply it. And that is where I'm seeing a lot of hope, because we get to move forward. I get so frustrated having to say, this is what racism is, this is what sexism is, this is what transmisogyny is. And I know that's important work, but with the young people, they're like, can we move on to what it looks like to actually live this? And they're building that themselves, and they're actually coming back to us and correcting us. And then what I want for the future, I'll say this also ties back for me to being a parent. When you have an infant and you look at them and you're like, what are you? Oh my goodness, you're this weird alien thing. You could be anything. And then you watch the world put boxes on them. You watch the world steal from them and say, you can't be that, you can't be that, you can't be that. And so when I think about the future, I think about the universes that every Black person was born containing. And I think about how universes want to expand. And I think of a future for us where we can expand as large as we want to. And I want the future to surprise me, and I believe that the Black future will surprise me, and I can't wait for that day.
The Black future will surprise us. Ijeoma Oluo, thank you so much.
Your point about constantly talking about oppression really resonates. I have a writer friend in the UK called Renee Edo-Lodge who wrote a book called Why I Stopped Talking to White People About Race. And when this book came out, it exploded everywhere. And of course, the inevitable happened, which is she did so much heavy lifting, talking about addressing racism and what the solutions were. And people were constantly coming to her to address this. And I think by the end of it, she was really exhausted. So for me, it would be great to be able to move in a world where we get to talk about other things, where we get to talk about joy, the liberation of Blackness and the freedom of imagination. That would be extraordinary and exquisite for me, because I do feel we do a lot of hard work around this stuff. It's constant. You never get a break from it. You know, whatever space you move through, it's political. You know, somebody asked me a couple of months ago, are you a writer or are you a black writer? And I said, well, I would love the luxury of just being regarded as a writer, but the reality is it's just not going to happen for me. Wherever I go, people are going to ask me that question, and it's so loaded and so charged. But it's not something that I run from. But, you know, some days I want to talk about it, some days I don't. That's the nuance of the experience, if I'm being honest. So for me, joy and liberation is absolutely key. How do we continue to create spaces of joy and celebration and innovation, which, you know, black communities are so full of? That is where I want to go in the future.
Thank you, Irenosen. Thank you so much. I want to leave you with two thoughts. First of all, thank you for a fantastic conversation. When you look at one of the reasons why Kamala Harris didn't win, among the many, many reasons, was because she was a black woman. And I want to tell everyone, if you haven't seen this already, a fantastic project called the Blindian Project, Blindian, B-L-I-N-D-I-A-N, which brings together black and brown communities on social media, on the website, Blindian-Project. Has anyone here seen that yet? Check them out on Instagram, fabulous Instagram feed about Indians, South Asians, black folks around the world. So please check that out. Thank you very much, everybody.